June 18, 1944. A village square in Beauville, Normandy. The air, thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth and cordite, hangs heavy over the cobblestones. For the men of Charlie Company, 3rd Platoon, 29th Infantry Division, this is the smell of liberation, but it is not a sweet smell. It is tinged with the metallic tang of blood and the bitter smoke of burnt-out Panzer IVs, their blackened hulls slumped like dead iron beasts at the edge of town. Captain Elias Vance, his helmet pushed back on his sweat-caked hairline, watches his men file past the shattered facade of the village church. Their faces are a mixture of exhaustion and wary relief. They have pushed the German 352nd Infantry Division back, farm by farm, hedgerow by hedgerow, paying for every foot of French soil with grit and ammunition. Now, in Beauville, the fighting has stopped, but the war has not. You can feel it in the silence, a tense, watchful quiet that has replaced the roar of artillery. The villagers emerge slowly, not with the jubilant cheers the men saw in the newsreels, but with a guarded, almost suspicious appraisal. These are people who have lived under the boot for 4 years. Freedom is a foreign concept, and its arrival is violent. Sergeant Mike Sully O'Sullivan, a man whose easy Boston grin has been ground down by the Normandy campaign, gestures with his M1 Garand towards the mairie, the town hall. "Captain, looks like the welcoming committee." A small group of men stand on the steps, their civilian clothes jarring against the array of captured German and antique French weapons they carry. They wear armbands of the French Forces of the Interior, the FFI, the Maquis. Their leader, a gaunt man with a formidable mustache and eyes that seem to burn with a cold righteous fire, steps forward. He introduces himself as Jean-Luc Dubois. He speaks no English. Corporal Abe Zimmerman, a skinny kid from Brooklyn who learned French from his Parisian mother, steps up to translate, the words passing back and forth in a clipped, uneasy exchange. Dubois speaks of collaborators, of justice, of the cleansing that must follow liberation. Vance listens, his gaze sweeping over the grim-faced resistance fighters. These aren't soldiers, they're executioners. Dubois gestures towards a courtyard behind the town hall, a place walled in by old stone, once used for markets or village festivals. Now it serves a different purpose. Vance follows, his men trailing behind, their boots crunching on gravel and debris. The air in the courtyard is colder, stagnant. About 30 villagers have gathered, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and grim satisfaction. They part for the Americans, their whispers ceasing as the uniformed soldiers enter the space. And there, at the far end of the yard, is the reason for this assembly. A woman is tied to a thick wooden post, a relic once used for tethering horses. Her head is bowed, a cascade of dirty blonde hair obscuring her face. She wears a stained gray uniform, the tunic of a Luftwaffe Helferin, a female auxiliary. Her hands are bound tightly behind the post with thick rope. She is young, perhaps no older than 20 or 21. She does not move. She seems almost resigned, a statue of despair carved against the damp, moss-covered stone wall. A priest stands nearby, his face pale, holding a small prayer book, his lips moving silently. The scene is a medieval tableau dropped into the mechanized horror of the 20th century. Captain Vance feels a cold knot tighten in his stomach. This is not justice. This is a lynching. The air crackles with a tension thicker than the morning fog. Captain Vance steps forward, Corporal Zimmerman glued to his side. "Ask him what she's accused of," Vance says, his voice low but firm, never taking his eyes off the resistance leader, Dubois. Zimmerman translates. The Frenchman spits his reply, his words sharp and cutting, a torrent of righteous fury. "He says she was a communications operator at the Kommandantur," Zimmerman relays, struggling to keep up. "He says she passed the names of suspected partisans to the Gestapo. He claims she is responsible for the deaths of his brother and 4 others from this village." Dubois points a trembling, accusatory finger at the woman. At the mention of the Gestapo, a low murmur ripples through the crowd. Their faces harden. To them, this isn't an execution. It's a long-delayed exorcism of the evil that has haunted their homes. Vance studies the woman tied to the post. Does she look like a monster? She looks like a terrified girl. She is a prisoner of war, Vance states, the words carrying the full weight of his authority as an officer in the United States Army. She is to be turned over to us. The Geneva Convention applies. Zimmerman translates, his voice faltering slightly under the intensity of Dubois' glare. The Frenchman scoffs, a sound of pure derision. The Geneva Convention? He snarls in French. Where was the convention when they shot my brother in this very square? Where was it when they dragged Madame Dubois from her home? This is French soil. This is French justice. The crowd grumbles in agreement. A few of Dubois' men shift their weapons, the metallic clicks echoing in the tense silence. Sergeant O'Sullivan subtly gestures, and his squad spreads out, their own rifles held at a low, non-threatening but ready position. They are outnumbered, but the olive drab of their uniforms and the disciplined calm of their movements create an authority the ragtag resistance fighters cannot match. Vance takes another step forward, closing the distance between himself and Dubois until only a few feet separate them. He needs the man to understand, to see past the bloodlust. I understand your anger, Vance says, his voice even, forcing Zimmerman to translate his tone as much as his words. I do, but we are not the Nazis. We don't do this. We are here to restore law, not to participate in vengeance. She will be interrogated. If she is guilty of war crimes, she will be tried by a proper military tribunal. Dubois' face is a mask of contempt. He sees not an ally, but an obstacle. He sees an American officer, naive and arrogant, presuming to lecture him on justice after arriving 4 years too late. He turns his back on Vance, a gesture of ultimate dismissal, and nods to one of his men, a lanky youth holding a formal-looking document. The boy clears his throat, his hands shaking as he unrolls the paper. The crowd falls silent. The priest closes his eyes and crosses himself. The boy begins to read aloud in a high, wavering voice. The formal French phrases, the declaration of crimes against the French people, the sentence of death by firing squad, drift across the courtyard. It is an official order of execution. The finality of it hangs in the air, a death sentence pronounced against the gray Normandy sky. The formal French words wash over the American soldiers, most of whom understand nothing but the grim finality in the reader's tone. But the woman at the post understands. As the young man's voice recites the litany of her alleged crimes, conspiracy with the occupying force, betrayal of the French people, aiding the Gestapo, her head slowly lifts. For the first time, Captain Vance sees her face clearly. It is streaked with dirt and tears, her blue eyes wide with a terror that seems to have hollowed her out from the inside. Her name, according to the document, is Elfriede Keller. She is a Funkhelferin, a radio assistant. She is 20 years old. The paper is her death warrant, and each syllable spoken is a hammer blow, shattering the last vestiges of her composure. Her breathing becomes ragged, a series of short, panicked gasps. You can see the denial in her eyes, warring with the horrifying certainty of what is happening. This isn't a nightmare. This is real. The reader reaches the final, damning phrase, condamné à être fusillé, sentenced to be shot. The words hang in the air for a heartbeat. Then the silence is shattered. A sound erupts from the woman, a raw, animalistic cry of pure, undiluted terror. It is not a plea for mercy or a protest of innocence. It is the sound of a human being staring into the abyss. Nein, bitte, nein, she screams, the German words tearing from her throat. She thrashes against the ropes, her body bucking and twisting, the rough hemp biting into her wrists. The villagers flinch. Some look away, their righteous anger momentarily shaken by this primal display of fear. Others stare, their expressions hard, unmoved. They have seen too much death to be swayed by the tears of a German. Dubois' face remains a mask of stone. He nods to 3 of his men, who step forward, raising their rifles. A mismatched collection of a German Kar 98K, a French Lebel, and a bolt-action hunting rifle. They form a ragged firing squad 10 paces from the post. The woman's screams intensify, her voice cracking with hysteria. Ich will nicht sterben! The cry is piercing, desperate. I don't want to die. The German words need no translation. It is the most fundamental human plea, a raw nerve exposed for all to see. It cuts through the political hatred, the justifications, the fog of war, and lands with sickening weight in the pit of Captain Vance's stomach. He has seen men die in battle, screaming, crying, calling for their mothers. But this is different. This is a cold, calculated ritual of vengeance, and his presence makes him a party to it. He looks at Dubois, whose hand is slowly rising, preparing to give the signal to fire. He looks at his own men, their knuckles white on their rifles, their eyes wide and fixed on him, waiting. There are no more words to be said. Diplomacy has failed. The time for talking is over. In that split second, 100 possible consequences flash through his mind. A diplomatic incident, a firefight with allies, a court-martial. He shoves them all aside. There is only one thing that matters. He meets Sergeant O'Sullivan's gaze and gives a short, sharp nod. The order is given. The order is understood. Go, Vance shouts, his voice a thunderclap in the charged atmosphere. Get her now. The courtyard erupts into chaos. The moment Captain Vance gives the order, his platoon moves with the fluid, violent efficiency of trained infantry. They are not a mob, they are a machine. Sergeant O'Sullivan and 2 other soldiers, Corporal Miller and Private First Class Santoro, burst forward, their M1 Garands held high, using the rifles to shove their way through the stunned crowd of villagers. People shout and stumble backward, creating a narrow, chaotic path toward the post. The French resistance fighters are caught completely by surprise. Their makeshift firing squad hesitates, their rifles wavering as they look to their leader, Dubois, for guidance. Dubois is incandescent with rage. Arrête! He bellows, his voice hoarse with fury. Stop! He raises his own weapon, a German Luger pistol, and points it not at the Americans, but into the air, firing a single, deafening shot. The crack of the pistol echoes off the stone walls, a sharp, angry punctuation mark to his command. His men react. They raise their own weapons, the muzzles now pointing directly at the advancing American soldiers. For a terrifying second, the courtyard becomes a powder keg. A dozen rifles are leveled on all sides, American GIs staring down the barrels of French partisans, who in turn are staring down the barrels of other GIs providing cover. It is the kind of insane, tragic standoff that can only happen in the madness of war, where allies are suddenly adversaries, and the line between liberation and occupation blurs into nothing. Corporal Zimmerman is screaming in frantic, broken French, "Don't shoot! We are allies! Ne tirez pas! Nous sommes alliés!" But his voice is lost in the cacophony of shouting and the panicked cries of the villagers scrambling for cover. Captain Vance draws his Colt M1911 sidearm, his eyes locked on Dubois. He does not raise it to fire, but holds it at his side, a clear signal that while he will not initiate violence, he is fully prepared to end it. Meanwhile, O'Sullivan and his 2 men reach the post. The German woman, Elfriede, is limp with terror, her eyes squeezed shut, bracing for the bullets that never came. She is sobbing uncontrollably. O'Sullivan pulls out his trench knife and saws through the thick ropes binding her wrists. The moment she is free, her legs give out and she collapses. Santoro, a burly kid from Philadelphia, grabs her under one arm while Miller grabs the other. "Get up! Aufstehen! Move!" Santoro yells, using one of the few German words he knows. They have to physically drag her, her boots scraping uselessly against the gravel. She is dead weight, a prisoner of her own fear. They are completely exposed, a slow-moving target in the middle of a Mexican standoff. A young Macasse fighter, no older than 17, nervously clicks the safety off his MP40. Sergeant O'Sullivan sees the movement out of the corner of his eye. He doesn't hesitate. He spins and fires his Garand, not at the boy, but at the stone wall just above his head. The loud report of the 30-06 round and the spray of stone chips and dust from the impact makes the young fighter cry out and drop his weapon. The fragile truce is broken. The standoff is over. The race is on. The ricochet from O'Sullivan's rifle is the spark that ignites the powder keg. It's not a firefight, but a frantic, shoving, screaming melee. Captain Vance's men create a moving perimeter around the soldiers dragging the German woman, using their bodies and their rifles as a shield. They move backward, a tight knot of olive drab in a sea of enraged French civilians and partisans. "Move, move, back to the half-track," Vance yells, his voice raw. He keeps his Colt aimed at the ground, a last resort he prays he won't have to use. Dubois is screaming curses, his face purple with rage, calling Vance and his men cowards, Nazi lovers, traitors to the cause of liberation. The villagers, their fear turning to anger, begin to press in, some throwing stones and clumps of dirt that thud harmlessly against the soldiers' helmets and backs. You can feel their betrayal. These Americans, their saviors, are now stealing their justice, protecting the very evil they had sworn to destroy. The journey of 50 yards from the courtyard to the street feels like a mile. Every second is stretched thin by adrenaline. Santoro and Miller heave the woman forward, her sobs now quiet, replaced by a kind of stunned, whimpering shock. She stumbles, her legs still not cooperating, and for a moment it looks like they will all go down in a heap. But O'Sullivan is there, grabbing the back of her tunic and hauling her upright, pushing the trio forward with sheer force of will. They burst out of the narrow courtyard entrance and into the main village square, where their M3 half-track waits, its .50 caliber Browning machine gun a silent, potent threat. The driver, a corporal named Henderson, already has the engine rumbling, having heard the pistol shot moments before. The rest of the platoon, who had been securing the square, now form a final defensive line between the vehicle and the pursuing crowd. "Get her in," O'Sullivan shouts, practically throwing the woman over the steel side of the half-track. She lands in a heap on the floor of the vehicle. Santoro and Miller clamber in after her, followed by O'Sullivan and the rest of the squad, rifles still trained on the crowd. Captain Vance is the last one to board, climbing in backward, his eyes never leaving the furious face of Jean-Luc Dubois, who now stands at the front of the mob, his Luger hanging uselessly at his side. Their eyes lock for a final, intense moment, a moment of shared conflict and profound, unbridgeable misunderstanding. Then Vance drops into the half-track. "Henderson, go! Get us out of here!" The half-track lurches forward, its heavy treads chewing at the ancient cobblestones. The crowd surges, but it is too late. The vehicle gains speed, leaving the enraged villagers of Beauville behind in a cloud of diesel exhaust. Inside the rumbling steel box, the American soldiers finally allow themselves to breathe. The adrenaline begins to recede, leaving a sour, metallic taste in their mouths. And on the floor, curled into a ball, the German woman, Elfriede Keller, weeps silently, not in terror anymore, but with the shuddering, exhausted relief of someone who has walked to the very edge of death and been dragged, kicking and screaming, back to life.